Good evening all and welcome. I just want to say, if any of you listening today can identify or resonate with the stories, you could be in an abusive relationship. Please, if you find yourself in a situation like this, seek help. You deserve better. Even if you don't have any confidence and feel like no one will ever love you, trust me, it's all in your head and you deserve more. So find out if this could be you, although I hope not. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. It has taken me a while to even get up the nerve to write this story, even though these incidents happened more than a decade ago. I was never very popular in school with members of the opposite sex. I didn't even have those cute elementary school boyfriends. At the time, I was overweight and thought I just must be hideously ugly. But now I realize it was simply because I was shy, quiet, and had no confidence. In truth, I was quite pretty despite being a little chubby. I didn't know this back then though. My self-esteem was so low, you would have had to scrape it off the ground with a spatula. On top of that, my home life was horrible. My parents were both alcoholics and drug addicts. I say all of this not to drum up any sympathy, but simply to show you that I had no supportive or sane person in the coming months to lean upon, which might explain why things got as bad as they did. I was a junior in high school when I first met him, Jay. He sat across from me in a certain class, and I was instantly attracted to him. I did what I always did when I had a crush on a boy. I watched him. Sometimes he would catch me looking at him, and one time he gave me a small smile. That smile gave me the courage to actually talk to him, and at some point we agreed to go have lunch together. This was probably 2 weeks after the smile. No romantic gestures were made, but we became good friends and began going to lunch together every day. Our school allowed us to go off campus, and we had a full hour, and we both had a car, so we would just drive around and talk. As the weeks wore on, my other friends began complaining that I never went to lunch with them anymore, and in truth, I did miss hanging out with them too. So I told Jay I was going to spend some time with my friends. He was so angry, hurt, and disappointed that I agreed I would only go to lunch with my friends on Thursdays. The rest of the week we would be together. We were not even dating at this point, and I found his clinginess off-putting, so my initial crush quickly faded away. In my mind, we were only just friends, and I was perfectly fine with that. My friends thought it was so weird that I had to make a deal with him just so that I could hang out with them. And looking back, I see this was totally ridiculous, and I should have cut ties with him right there and then. But as I said, he was the only boy who had ever shown an interest in me, even just as a friend, and I didn't want to give that up. The attention felt good. In the spring, just as I was starting to feel the relief of my crush for Jay ending, he unexpectedly asked me to go to the prom. He was a senior, so this was his only chance to go. I had never been to a prom or on a date, so I said yes, thinking it would be fun. It was actually a wonderful evening. I had never felt so beautiful in my whole life. I was kind of caught up in this magical Cinderella type feeling. So when Jay leaned in to kiss me, I kissed him back. It was my first kiss and it was sweet, even though so many of my memories with Jay are awful. After that kiss I was floating. It truly is a happy memory for me despite all that eventually happened. My crush for Jay had ended, but the kiss had been wonderful, and I had never had a boyfriend before, so even though I wasn't 100% into him anymore, I quickly agreed to be his girlfriend. After that, everything changed. Jay instantly became 10,000 times more clingier than he had been before. He said he loved me 2 days after kissing me. I didn't want to say it back because I didn't love him, but he pressured me into saying it by making me feel guilty. I guess I should have just said this earlier, but I have a huge heart, and hate hurting anyone's feelings, so I often find myself just going along with things to make the situations and others happy. That's what happened with Jay. Over time, I even convinced myself that I really did love him. After I became Jay's girlfriend, it was like I belonged to him. I still had permission to go grab lunch with my friends once a week, but they were always complaining about how clingy he was with me. I thought it was sweet. I couldn't believe a boy liked me this much. It did wonders for my self-image. After school let out, it would soon become apparent that I would be expected to spend every single day of that summer with Jay, and I was also the one who had to drive to his place and then all around town whenever we wanted to go, since I had a better car. Now, I realize he was just a lazy douchebag, but back then I justified the wasted gasoline for which he never paid me back. We spent a lot of time at Jay's house because I hated being home with my own family, given the situation. I need to describe the place as it's important. The first time I saw the house that Jay lived in with his parents, I honestly thought a bomb had gone off. There was stuff piled everywhere. If you've ever seen the show Hoarders, it was like that. Jay told me that his mum used to clean, but she became so upset that he and his father never helped her, and that just one day she stopped, just like that. And the result was this horrifically chaotic, crowded house that had been accumulating this mess for years. One day there was this stomach-churning smell, and we had to go hunting for it, and finally found this grocery bag under a pile of crap. Whatever was in it had liquefied. I mean, this place was so disgusting, and the fact that Jay and his father were willing to live like that just so that they didn't have to clean should have told me to run the hell away. Jay's father did nothing but smoke and watch TV all day. He was this hugely obese, gruff type of guy who acknowledged my presence only with a nod of his head. In contrast, Jay's mother was sweet, but spent all her time in the back room, which I later learned she was doing as she was in the process of separating from her husband. They no longer shared a room or even spoke to each other. I was to find out a very dark truth about their marriage later on. Anyway, as time went on, Jay began to pressure me into sleeping with him. I didn't love him and didn't want to lose my virginity to someone I wasn't that into, so I always brushed it off. Things were darkening in our relationship by the time school started back up in the fall. I was a senior that year, and Jay was taking classes at a local community college, so at least I had some freedom from him, though he still met me for lunch frequently. That winter, to get out the house and also to have some pocket money, I got my first job at a fast food place. Jay was instantly upset with me because he wouldn't get to see me as much, so he applied for the same place. He did not get the job, but he frequently came by during my shifts to check up on me because he didn't want me meeting or talking to other guys. He was particularly hateful of my male co-workers because we all liked to joke around and have a good time. I didn't realize at the time how weird this all was. I truly thought it was sweet that he was so into me and was so jealous and protective. Jay increased the pressure on me to sleep with him until it was almost unbearable. But I can be a stubborn hard-ass when I really believe in something, and I just refused to give in, even though by then he would openly get angry about it with me. Over time, he pressured me into letting him fill me up. Though I told him he wasn't allowed to look, he did anyway. He also touched me somewhere inappropriately without my consent, which humiliated me. In fact, that was all I felt when he touched me intimately, humiliated and degraded. I began to secretly loathe him and became more determined than ever that I would in my whole life never give him my virginity, even if he were the last man on earth and the human race depended on our procreation, even if it killed me. He began to disgust me, and I resented the time I didn't get to spend with my friends. I was pissed about using all the gas in my car to drive him around, and I was sick of his clinginess. It was no longer cute nor endearing. I wanted to end the relationship, but shockingly I still didn't want to hurt his feelings. That spring I began studying domestic violence for a project. and that's when all the pieces fell together. My relationship with Jay had almost every single sign of an abusive relationship, and I was absolutely gutted. At that point, I began to seriously think about how I was going to get out of this. I began to call the domestic violence hotline, and they talked some sense into me, validating what I already knew to be true. Meanwhile, Jay was getting creepier and crazier. He got a job at the same telemarketing place as I did, and he began to match my shifts so that he could sit right next to me and take calls. He got so mad when I talked to any guy, even old guys. Sometimes he would find pictures of me with guy friends from the past and would demand to know who they were and why I was with them. He also began making veiled comments and threats about taking my virginity, with or without my consent. Once he said he'd be so pissed off if someone else touched me because he didn't want another guy getting to me first. He later denied this, but I know what I heard. One of the scariest things he ever told me was that once he was walking through his neighborhood and saw a front door of a house wide open. He walked into this stranger's house and a girl was there taking a shower. He told me he could barely keep himself from going up to her, and it was the closest he'd ever come to doing something horrific to a woman. I didn't realize at the time that he was telling me this not as a story or as a confession, but as a thinly veiled threat to me. Then the bombshell came. Now that Jay was old enough to move out, his mother decided to finalize the divorce. She had stayed with his father for his sake, and he was an only child. That day, she sat down with him and told him the truth about his birth. His father had sexually assaulted her while she was asleep and gotten her pregnant, and that's how he was conceived. She woke up midway through the attack. Her parents, who I guess were religious nuts, pushed her to get married. This news understandably devastated Jay, and I honestly think it pushed him over some kind of an edge that he had been getting close to all his life. I tried to be there for him as much as I could, and I truly felt compassion. I mean, what a horrible weight to carry on your shoulders. His mother had lived a miserable existence with her rapist, all for his sake. It's actually heartbreaking. I felt so sorry for him and for his mother. No wonder she didn't want to clean for that disgusting excuse of a man. That spring she moved into her own apartment and Jay moved in with her. He rarely spoke to his father after that. And the man later died, probably from his unhealthy habits. Before the move happened though, I tried to break up with Jay. Things had gotten so crazy and so intense that I was scared. Jay was still threatening me. He was so frustrated with me that he was punching walls, kicking a dent into his car and throwing things, cutting himself in front of me and the like. It was classic intimidation tactics that abusers use to cow their victims, and it worked on me. However, I still had enough sense from the volunteers at the domestic violence hotline to try and get away. I would call them from payphones during the school day, too scared to use my cell phone for fear of anyone finding out. I was so incredibly alone. No one knew, and I'm sure if I were a different girl with a weaker personality, this relationship would have ended my life one way or another. The night I tried to leave Jay, we were at his father's house. His father was doing his usual routine of smoking and watching TV. I tried to let Jay down as gently as I could, saying it was me and not him, but he flew into a rage. When I tried to leave the room, he grabbed me, pulled me back onto the bed, which was the first and only time he physically assaulted me. His father heard me call out and ask if I was okay, and I saw that as my out. I hurried out of the house and spent the loneliest moments of my entire life sitting in my car next to the curb, sobbing and wondering where I should go. I knew my parents were drunk and wouldn't even care, and now that Jay had so effectively isolated me, I now had no friends. That was one of the darkest moments in my life, and I'll never forget it. I eventually called an old friend of mine who I hadn't spoken to in months, explained the situation and asked to spend the night. She became one of my closest and dearest friends after that, and was my maid of honor in my wedding. But I digress. That night was a turning point in our relationship for sure. Jay tried everything to get me back, even calling from the phones of our mutual friends to trick me into answering. He also began to drive slowly past my house all the time. It seemed that every time I looked out the window, there he was driving by, staring at the house. This happened so frequently, I can only assume he drove past the place at least once an hour. He would leave gifts on the porch and told me how heartbroken he was and how he would change and never do anything to hurt me again. That's why I went back to him. I know, I was stupid. It was illogical, inconceivable, but I did. I had classic battered woman syndrome. I was isolated, had no self-esteem, and no support. Over the next year, we would be together a few months, then something scary would happen and I would leave him, and the cycle would start over. I was miserable. During that time, he got arrested for walking around with a huge knife he'd gotten from a weapon shop. Someone had seen him walking around in their neighborhood and called the cops. Why he was walking in some random neighborhood with that, I don't know. But when I talk about the story, he told me about the girl showering. I get sick thinking of the possibilities. We continued on this half-relationship state until my second year of college, when I finally found the courage to completely cut him off. For a long time after that, he continued to stalk me, driving through my neighborhood, appearing at places I was. He did not let up until I met my now husband, David, who vowed to absolutely end this guy if he even saw him. And while I didn't tell this to Jay directly, I said enough that he got the message. David was the opposite end of Jay. And I want to end this story on a happy note because we are still together 11 years later, happily married with a 1-year-old son. We live in a completely different state now. A couple of my family members have even run into Jay over the years, and creepily enough, he claims not to remember me. I'm not sure if he's married, but I hope he isn't. If he is, his wife is in hell. This is where I leave this story. Hopefully it will help another girl avoid the traps I fell into. Nearly 10 years ago, I dated a girl for several months. There had been a few red flags right from the start that I think I should have listened to, but I was naive and kept telling myself that she was a decent person with a terrible streak of bad luck. Our second date was the first time I went to her apartment. We were having a few drinks, watching movies on a computer, and ended up doing it right there on her couch. We started dating officially, and it doesn't take long for her to start exhibiting some of the classy, clingy girlfriend traits. I'm a little bit put off by it, but just tell myself that I'm overreacting and not to break it off because she's a little clingy and insecure. A few months later, I was hanging around her apartment when I found a shoebox in her pajama drawer full of things from her last relationship, which was with a guy. I should mention here that I'm a lesbian. Letters, nude photos, all of them together, all kinds of stuff. I thought it was really strange, beyond the obvious reasons, because everything she told me about this relationship sounded awful. She said he'd hit her, throw her around, say nasty things to her that had turned her off from men, and generally crappy relationship stuff. Whenever I asked her why she had this box, she shrugged it off and didn't really give me an answer. I'm not a jealous person, so I figured it was some sort of healing process, again naive, but I pretty much forgot about it. Here's where it starts to get really fun. Fast forward a few months. One night we're talking, and she tells me this story about a man that her mum dated when she was 6 or 7 years old that she didn't like. The man had a son that was about 10 years old that lived with him. She wanted her mum's boyfriend gone, so she told her mum that he had touched her one night while he was looking after her and his son. He didn't, and had him arrested. The son told police that nothing had happened and that he'd been there with her the whole night, but the man went to prison anyway and was beaten to death by a biker gang. She ended this story with a laugh and said, "I wonder where they buried him." Then just continued on with her day as if she hadn't just dropped this giant WTF story on me. To this day, I still don't know if it even happened or if she made it all up to show me how evil she could be. Either one is insane. I decided right there and then that I needed to break it off with her, unleashing the "I'll come to your house and end you in your sleep" type of psycho I knew was in her somewhere. It takes a few weeks, but I managed to end it. She still messaged me constantly and I was getting better at not being sucked into her guilt trips. Then she started sending me webcam photos of us that I'd never seen before. I didn't connect where they were from until she started sending me videos. Remember that second date at her apartment? She recorded the whole thing on her webcam. I had no idea. My stomach still knots and my blood still boils when I think about this. About 2 months after the breakup, I got an ominous goodbye type message from her, also saying she wanted to see me one last time. I lived on the opposite end of the city and really didn't like taking a 2-hour bus commute to go deal with more of her melodramatic nonsense. So I contacted 2 of her friends that lived nearby, one that was 6 months pregnant, and asked if they could go check on her. My day goes on until I get a phone call from the police. They filled me in with what happened. When the friends went to her apartment, she answered the door wielding a large knife and went ballistic when she realized I wasn't there. The friends ran and called the police. The officers arrived and they had to put her in cuffs and took her to a psych ward. After looking through the apartment, cops found her bedroom covered with lit candles and photos of me and us spread out all over the bed. In the living room, they found a suicide letter that was several pages long. In it, she spoke about my death and how it couldn't be helped. I was in shock, so the cop had to spell it out for me. She had every intention of ending you, and then herself. You did the right thing by not coming here. She continues stalking me online, and when I block her on all social media platforms, she starts sending threat texts. I answered long enough to tell her that if she doesn't leave me alone, I'd fill in a restraining order. This kept her away for a while, until she showed up at a venue I was working at and tried to attack me. Big thanks to the quick reflexes of the security guard on site for keeping me safe that night. The next day, she acted like nothing had happened. I filed the restraining order and wasted 6 months of my time dealing with courts, only to have a judge dismiss the case as a lady spat. The stalking eventually stopped, but I was always on high alert. Even today, the sight of a magenta/fire hydrant red dye makes my skin crawl. To preface this, I was young, maybe 18 or 19, and I had no idea what I was getting myself into. My father owns 3 businesses and was actively dating his business partner, and was providing for her. She also made advances on me, which kind of creeped me out. She would buy us all food, and at first I was grateful, but then I started becoming nervous, as she wanted to be alone with me a lot. My father ended up getting married, but didn't tell her, and she got really upset with him, and told me not to tell her. She came to my job and demanded to see my father, to which I told her he wasn't here. She screamed at me and said we would soon regret it. Due to the disturbing nature of it, I called the cops, and all they did was take my name, but didn't actually look into it. So fast forward, I come home around midnight, as I had just come home from my second job, dead tired from school. I ate and crashed on my bed. It had to be at least 3 in the morning when I heard my door open. At first I didn't move because I assumed it was my calico cat Misty pouring at my door, as she liked to sleep with me. When I groaned her name, she didn't answer. It struck me as strange, but I wasn't worried until I felt a presence standing over me. I quickly woke up and discovered my father's ex in our house above me, crazy-eyed. She was screaming and saying how she would get her revenge on my father. I quickly rolled out of bed, ran past her and called the authorities. She openly tried to fight my father's wife and tried to attack my father. The police came and arrested her on the spot. That was the scariest thing I've ever been through, and I'm glad I won't see her again. Now I sleep with a blade next to my bed and a taser. Please be careful, as you never know who might want to pay you a late-night visit. I went from being a social butterfly in regards to dating to a nearly paranoid hermit. Here's why. I'm 30. I've been on a lot of dates through my adulthood, mostly because I enjoy meeting new people, and I suppose psychoanalyzing them. That sounds odd, but I did a major in psychology for a reason, and I just think humans are fascinating. Of course there are certain criteria. No hardcore drug users, no creeps. I don't want to go out with someone my mum's age. I could go on, but you get it. This has been a positive in many ways. Networking, making new friends, playing matchmaker, gaining insight on dating in general, and sometimes someone surprises me, and they are nothing like I imagined. Maybe their pictures were bad, or I knew them from work or a formal setting, and their personality is marked differently in a casual setting. And honestly, even if it doesn't work out, it's cool when that happens because it reminds me not to judge people and keep an open mind. So I've been on some bad first dates, so bad that they make awesome stories, and when my friends are depressed, these are awesome little tales I can whip out to make people laugh. When I'm down about being single, I even think about these and have a chuckle. I'm just going to quickly give one of my favorites. I once went out with a recently honorably discharged Marine, relocated from another state. We got pulled over in a small town for speeding. He was taken to the station in cuffs because of a speeding ticket that wasn't marked as paid from where he was from, though he had in fact paid it. He later proved this to me because we dated for a short time after, but the cops at the time wouldn't tell me why he was arrested. We would joke about it all the time later on. The cop had to give me a lift back to my car because I couldn't drive his old truck that was a standard. It was so embarrassing. They gave me a very patriarchal lecture, and he was freaking out because he liked me and thought I would never talk to him again. We had to walk for 4 miles back to his truck upon release because he refused the cop's offer for a lift. He was a true gentleman, very traditional cowboy type. Stetson hat that came off when he ate, boots and the Levi's, white t-shirt and flannel shirt. Kinda looked like a young Tom Hardy now that I think of it. Maybe that's why this is my favorite bad first date story. Once we went to a river for a picnic and the same truck got stuck and we had no cell signal, so we had to hoof it through national forest for miles to call for help. A mountain lion ended up following us, and thankfully he had a conceal and carry and a very old school looking revolver, and I honestly felt like I was in a western movie or something. He was very protective and knew exactly what to do. Well, it didn't work out because he took another girl to the same spot and got stuck again. It was an amazing view, and someone who helped pull his truck out for the second time contacted me to let him know he was two-timing. In his defense, I sent mixed messages about dating other people and lived a few hours away, and he probably was a little young for me. Anyway, thank you for this story, Marine Cowboy Tom Hardy doppelganger. But that is all kid stuff compared to this central story. I was on a dumb dating app, not intending or expecting to go out with anyone from the site because I was happy being single and had just ended a relationship with an emotionally draining person. But as I preface, I'm very curious about people and open-minded, and that's why it came to bite me. I agreed to going out on a date with a guy who I had shared a lot of interests with, the same ethnic background, Romanian, which is rare where I live, and we even had the same birthday. He was very into astrology and tarot, and esoteric topics in general, including mythology and paganism. What stood out to me was that he was also very science-minded, and while being interested in the aforementioned stuff, also kept a rational, agnostic attitude about it and approached it from a far more academic perspective than a religious one. I was excited because this is rare where I live, in a very religious town. We actually spoke on the phone before we met, which is something I usually insist on to weed out the weirdos. In hindsight, I realized the first weird thing was after we hung up for the first time. He called me back despite me saying I was going to bed, but I let it go. Maybe he didn't see my text. Fast forward to the first meet. I asked him if he wanted to meet at a very popular local park. He said yes, but that he wanted to sit by the tennis courts specifically, as these are located on the same street, but they are a few houses that separate them from the main park. I thought it was part of the park, but I was actually wrong. It was owned by our local university, and this detail is relevant for later. I asked if he was into tennis, and he just said yes, and asked if he wanted to play, but he said he didn't have good equipment. I figured he just wanted to watch people play tennis or something. It stood out but wasn't a red flag yet. I got there before him, watched people play tennis for a while and thought, oh, maybe that's why he wanted to meet me here. Whoever got here first would be able to watch tennis and not be bored waiting. He spooked me because he snuck up on me. One second he wasn't there and the next he was introducing himself. I'm very observant of my surroundings and kept looking for him because he told me which direction he'd be walking from, as this was just down the street from his house, and to this day I don't know how he did it. I'm always sneaking up on others, sometimes on purpose because I can be an arse, and sometimes by accident, and this shook me, and I was discombobulated. I realized his photos were very bad on his profile. He was a very attractive guy in person, but his pictures where he would smile in a selfie just looked off. I don't smile so much in pictures, so I wondered if maybe it was because he was the same but trying to get past it. I don't know how to elaborate more than that. There was just something distinctly odd about his smile in pictures. I didn't notice it in person at all, which made me immediately wonder when we met if I was overly judgmental of people's photos. In hindsight, I'm not. Things started out a little awkward on his part. My style is just to say, "Hi, I'm Felicity," and start talking like we've met before. Most people love this. I love this. No job interview vibes, just two people hanging out. But there was something markedly different about him in person. On the phone he was chatty, witty, imaginative, and seemed to have a passion for life. In person he made fun of people nearby playing tennis because they weren't following the rules and ended up playing some funny awkward form of tennis volleyball. They were young teens, so I felt he was being a real ass. He was obviously checking out other chicks, not just noticing people come and go. There's a difference. Condescending about nearly everything I talked about and made some weird comment like he was very frugal. On the phone he said he spent too much money on travel and books, and his goal for the month was to not spend money on every beverage, but he was still going to drink coffee. I was like, "Coffee's a beverage, you're cheating." He legit got mad and said coffee is a necessity, and also he makes it the night before, so it doesn't count for the day. Wait, what? That makes no logical sense. Who wants stale coffee? He also said he follows a very strict diet because he knows exactly what it'll look like coming out. I wasn't following and he said, "You know, when you poo." At this point, I legit wondered if maybe he had some sort of disorder that would affect social interaction, but as someone who was on the spectrum and has friends and family who are, that just didn't feel right. So I thought, maybe he's just a jerk and probably trying really hard to appear smart and deep, hence the weird comments. I told him I needed to get home and check on my pal Ball's python, as I owned and bred them, and it's a great way to creep out the creepy guys. Not before he told me I had an orange-brown aura. I said that was cool because I love being outside during the autumn, and he just stared at me blankly. I offered to drive him home. Why did you do that? As he had walked, and I guess I was kind of nosy about which house was his. I also wanted to show off my car. Ego here. He said he was surprised. I was a professional, not a waitress or something. He worked at a Fazoli's, literally 2-minute drive away, parked in front of his house, and he asked me out for Thursday. It was Monday. My response was I couldn't for obvious reasons, and I could tell he was contemplating inviting me in or kissing me goodbye. He asked me how I felt about a goodbye kiss, and I said I had no feeling one way or another, again dumb, as he was very weird but was very good looking, and I figured a kiss goodbye for what definitely would be forever wouldn't be horrible. Well, this obviously pissed him off, because I was giving him no feedback, just to see what would happen, and I think he knew that, and he suddenly started telling me how I looked different than my photos. All of them are recent with no filters, and one was a professional headshot. The rest were just snaps from my iPhone. I asked him how so because I was genuinely puzzled, and he said he was shocked. Someone like me, he referred to me as an intellectual previously, which I'm not sure if he meant as a compliment or insult, would wear the leggings I had. They're just plain old leggings with a southwestern print, no crazy colors. I must have not reacted the way he wanted because he continued. He also said I looked heavier in person, and he said I also was darker than he thought I was. I am mixed race, ethnically Jewish and Native American, and this really pissed me off and made me think he was racist. But I casually said, "Well, yeah, I've been in the sun the past week," and laughed. I said, "That's interesting. Good night." He got out my car and said, "I bid you adieu," and not the French kind. I am assuming he meant to insult me further by a Freudian implication of not French as in kissing, or maybe he was just dumb and I'm reaching, but I replied, if it's spelt that way in French, and drove off, and promptly bought a milkshake and a huge order of mozzarella sticks on the way home. I asked some dude friends of mine if I did in fact look bigger in person. I'm ashamed I asked, but the answer was a resounding no, and forget the guy, he was just pissed he didn't get laid. Now I wish the story ended here because it would be one I could laugh about in hindsight. Kind of. But maybe not, because I had a nagging feeling about this dude. Something I couldn't pinpoint in my mind's eye. The more I thought about everything in context, his vibe was just so dark during the date at times. Eye contact with no blinking. That's weird. It weirds me out even though I'm usually huge on eye contact. And the negging that was quite cruel. So I googled his name, and he's on the sex offenders registry for soliciting from an underage girl when he was 23. She, 13. He's 38 now, for context. If it wasn't bad enough, he broke his probation by pleading guilty to stalking and got sent to jail for 120 days. He was a college student when this happened, and the girl was a college student too. I'm sure much younger than him. I have access to a few databases and found court documents. He was a stranger. He stalked her en route to school and on campus, even on the shuttle bus. He got kicked out of university and couldn't go back on campus ever. I got a message from him in the morning apologizing and responded with no worries, good luck out there, because I did not want this guy to be angry at me for obvious reasons. I reported him to the dating site and his profile got taken down. He contacted me again and said, if you had an issue with me, you could have just told me, and I played dumb. He believed me and vented about it, admitted to being an offender, and I pretended to be sympathetic and said I had a family member on the registry for peeing outside. That was a lie, but I do have a cousin who almost got in trouble for peeing outside when we were kids, and then he stopped messaging me. Thank God. I usually would have gone no contact, but my town isn't that big, and I didn't want this person having a grudge against me. I did more research and found out he couldn't go to the main park because sex offenders aren't allowed to go to parks with playground equipment, hence the tennis courts. Also, most people into auras interpret orange as sexual energy, I think. Because I don't have revealing photos on my dating site, my big, very non-juvenile boobs probably turned him off since he likes teenaged girls. Vomit. I think he's into metaphysical stuff because it's a community that's very open-minded and probably more willing to forgive his charges. The diet thing was probably because he was in a cell with a toilet, and I'm going to assume that in a small space, you smell your body waste, for lack of a classier term, for a long time. Can you buy an air freshener from commissionary? Maybe I should consult Orange is the New Black. Also, the weird social stuff aligns with antisocial personality disorder more than autism or Asperger's, according to one of my diagnostic psychological books from college. I am traumatized. I could not stop thinking about it and analyzing this for days on end. Literally one of the most normal, sane conversations I've had on the phone pre-date, well-dressed and groomed, and was very young looking for his age. Ew, he did actually have the same birthday as me according to his registration page, and shouldn't have had any issues finding dates. But I now know why he's single. If you'd have told me there's a sex offender messaging you, I would have guessed other people as a possibility over this dude. So I bought a background check membership and refused to ever meet up with anyone from the internet without doing one. Not that face-to-face dating during a pandemic is what it used to be, but even talking on Skype, I want to know. Paranoid? Yes. Peace of mind? Yes. Thankfully he does not know where I live or my full name, as I had installed Ring security in my house the day we started talking, and I had actually mentioned it casually. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Abusive relationships are not cool. If you've heard the stories now and find that you could be in one, I suggest you seek help. As I said at the start, you are worth much more than you probably think you are. And there's definitely someone out there who's better for you if you're not being treated fairly or with respect. Seriously, you need to look after you. I've never been in an abusive relationship myself, thankfully, but I have seen others be in terrible relationships, toxic relationships, and it's not something fun to watch, especially if they're close friends of yours. I don't want to oust any of my friends right off the bat, really, but if you do find yourself to be with someone and they're clingy and draining and you just don't want to be around them, then ask yourself, is it really a relationship? Is it really worth doing? Do you really want to be hanging out with those people? It gets to a point where you really need to think about how you value your time and the people who you keep around you. But yeah, I'm no expert, and I do recommend seeking help if you find yourself in this situation. But like I said at the start, hopefully none of you are in it, but if you are, I hope that you maybe get some help and that the stories help you realize where you are at. Alright, my voice is being destroyed. I'm gonna call it quits here. Stay safe, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.